It's well known that Berlin paid a heavy price as a result of the Second World War. American and British bombers and Soviet artillery leveled most of Berlin's central core. And although the city's street layouts remain mostly intact, most of the buildings and structures have been either replaced or totally refurbished. However, the scars of war, particularly from the Battle of Berlin, are still visible if you know where to look. You'll find them on government buildings, on monuments and national landmarks, on museums, on churches, on infrastructure, and even in graveyards. And in some places, they're so ubiquitous that Berliners barely notice them. But once you start looking for them, you'll see them in many places. And in this video, I'm going to take you on a walk through central Berlin, through Mitte, to show you some of these wounds of war. This is part one of a two-part series where I go around the city to uncover these locations. And for the first-time visitor to Berlin, these are locations you're likely going to visit. I've set this video up as a walking tour so that you can follow this route when you are in Berlin. Or you could hire me to take you around. Hi, I'm Steve from Experience Berlin Tours. Let's get started.
But first, a little bit of background. The Battle for Berlin was the final major engagement in the European theater of World War II. By mid-April of 1945, a force of over 2 million Soviet soldiers was at the city's doorstep. Berlin, especially its central areas, had been left in ruins from bombing raids by American and British air forces, and now artillery shelling from the Soviets. Outmanned and outgunned at least 3-1, the Germans chose to focus the city's most capable defenders inside of two central perimeters. The first was the city's S-Bahn ring, just a 40-kilometer perimeter. Inside of that was the second perimeter, the Citadel, which was the central area between the River Spree and the Landwehr Canal. The Citadel included the government sector, including the Reichstag and the Reichschancellery, where Hitler was hiding in a bunker. And thanks to the folks at Traces of War for this illustrative image. The most intense urban fighting happened in these two areas, and this is where most of the battle damage can still be seen today. And a special thanks to Peter, who runs the Berlin Battle Damage Facebook page, whose research influenced some of the locations included in this series. Peter runs guided tours in Berlin that focus on World War II and the Battle of Berlin, so be sure to check out his page and tours. And we start off at Friedrichstrasse station. Friedrichstrasse station is roughly the midpoint of the Stadtbahnline, an elevated railway that runs east and west through the city center. It was the city's first public rail line and was built in the late 18th century. The tracks sit on an 8-kilometer-long viaduct made mostly of brick, stone, and iron. The viaduct's arches, bridges, and elevated tracks were used as cover and firing positions by German forces. And in this section between Friedrichstrasse station and Museum Island, the viaduct runs just south of the River Spree. The combination of the river, the viaduct, and the buildings in between proved quite difficult for the Soviets to navigate, and this area saw intense urban fighting. Much has been repaired, or more likely plastered over, but it doesn't take long for you to spot the telltale signs of combat. And here we are on the south side of the viaduct, opposite the River Spree. And I assume these marks on this side were left by German defenders once they eventually withdrew from the viaduct and retreated to positions to my right. Now, if you cross over to the north side of the viaduct, you'll find something interesting. Here you'll find a building purposefully displaying its battle scars. Originally, this was the residence for one of Kaiser Wilhelm II's ministers, and it's an example of late Prussian architecture, a type once commonly found in this part of Berlin. And as is often the case, the bullet and mortar holes tend to congregate around doors and window openings. Presumably, these are the result of Soviet projectiles aimed at German defenders inside, and I could imagine that there was once a German soldier firing tank busters from this window. Okay, moving on back to the south side of the viaduct. Now, here we have examples of the bullet and mortar holes filled in. In previous decades, you would have seen this all over Berlin. Often the holes were filled with stucco or mortar, as it looks like the case is here, but cement and concrete patches as well as bricks were often used. And throughout the city, you can often see these patches underneath coats of exterior paint. This section that we are walking along now seems to have been designated as a memorial and is marked as such on Google Maps, and at times there's so much battle damage that Berliners don't even seem to notice. This section also has a lot of lousy graffiti, another thing that Berliners seem to overlook, but I digress. And perhaps the most remarkable battle damage to this viaduct happened towards its western end. On Leibnizstrasse, a shell presumably fired by a Soviet tank at retreating Germans bored its way through the metal trestle. I'll cover that more in part 2. but now it's on to Museum Island. Directly ahead is the northern wing of the Pergamon Museum, Berlin's premier museum for ancient art and architecture. It's pockmarked with small arms fire. Museum Island's strategic location in central Berlin, dividing the Spree and the Spree Canal, and its sturdy, monumental buildings made it a significant defensive position for the German military. There's even plastered up marks on the stone foundations for the Stadtbahnline. And I'm no expert, but I assume that the thick paint on this steel foundation obscures some battle marks. The Bode Museum, Berlin's Byzantine art museum, requires a closer examination, where you will find that many of the scars are patched up and blend into the building. And moving on. The corner building, located at Dorotheenstrasse 1, belongs today to the Humboldt University, but during the war, it housed administrative offices for the German Post Service. During the building's post-war restoration efforts, the Berlin Office for Preservation of Historic Monuments mandated that the war scars be preserved. And this brings us deeper into Museum Island. We are entering the Kolonnadehof, or the colonnaded courtyard. These columns bear testimony to the intensity of the Battle of Berlin. And the same goes for the Neues Museum, Berlin's ancient Egyptian and prehistoric artifacts museum, whose southern wall is seen here. And the damage extends into the courtyard. The entire eastern front of the Neues Museum is pockmarked. And in this image from 1945, you can see this section where the arrow is pointing. In places like this, it can feel as though the war is a very recent memory. Even the busts hanging on the facade were not spared, though surprisingly stayed mostly intact. The same is the case with the plinth that this equestrian statue stands on. In the background is the Alte National Gallery. Unlike its neighbors, where war scars were intentionally preserved, the Alte National Gallery underwent comprehensive restoration that effectively removed or concealed most visible signs of battle damage. But that can't be said about the Altes Museum, Berlin's premier museum of ancient Greek and Roman artifacts. Its columns and facades stand as evidence of the brutality of the battles, as is the case with the Granitschale, or in English, the granite bowl, in front of the museum. This bowl has been on this exact place for almost 200 years. Now, perhaps Museum Island's most prominent structure is the Berliner Dome, or Berlin Cathedral. The cathedral was gutted from years of war. Aerial bombardment had mostly laid waste to the interior. As you probably can surmise, German forces did use the Berliner Dome for firing positions during the Battle of Berlin. Artillery, tank, and small arms fire targeted the building. Today you can see patches all over the building, something that, in my opinion, eerily adds gravitas to the building. And hidden away on the northern edge of the western portico is an historic sign displaying the schedule of religious services, with 3 bullet holes in it. Other nearby buildings, such as the Neue Wache just across the Spree Canal, also serve as witnesses to war. And in the case of the Neue Wache, its front portico has been mostly repaired. You'll need to inspect the side and back walls to see how extensive the damage was. And a walk down Unter den Linden will give you an opportunity to see many instances of these patch repairs. But in this video, we are headed in another direction, toward Hackeschermarkt, into the Spandauer Vorstadt. Hackeschermarkt is the name of a market that once stood just outside of the medieval city gates. Today there's a train station that is the next station east along the Stadtbahnline Viaduct, and this area served as part of the last major defensive perimeter of Berlin's defensive fortifications. The area beyond is Spandauer Vorstadt. It's a popular location, with the main attraction being the Hackescherhofe, a series of courtyards dressed in the pleasing Art Nouveau style. Little evidence of the fierce fighting that took place here actually still exists, but if you walk up Große Hamburger Straße from Hackeschermarkt, you will find yourself passing what appears to be a standard courtyard between 2 buildings. However, on closer examination, you will discover that you are looking at an empty lot where a building once stood. The missing house is one of Berlin's most interesting memorials. There is no plaques or information from the street. However, on the exterior firewalls are 24 names of residents who resided here at some point between 1930 and 1945. Along with each name is the person's occupation and the years he or she lived here. Several names are of Jewish residents who were ultimately deported to concentration camps. Some are the names of those who took over their flats. Several residents died here when the building was hit by Allied bombs in February of 1945. And just in front of the missing house is a Stolperstein. These are bronze commemorative plaques installed in the sidewalks in front of the last known address of the particular victim mentioned on the stone. Each stone includes a name, a date of birth, when they were deported, and their ultimate fate. At the time of recording, there are just over 100,000 installed in total. Although these are not battle scars on buildings, they are a reminder of the wounds to society and human decency. And just across the street from the missing house is a residential building still owned by the Sophienkirche, or the Church of Sophia, that is still riddled with bullet holes. There used to be more visible damage on adjacent buildings, but a recent refurbishment has removed some of it. Their website mentions that this little section was preserved partly to appease tour guides who feared losing a stop on their tours. I found this ironic as I was researching for this video. One additional and important site before we bring part 1 to a close. It's an 8-minute walk in the direction of Rosenthalerplatz. The alte Garnisonfriedhof, established around 1706, is one of the city's oldest cemeteries and was primarily used for the burial of Prussian soldiers and officers. Although I could find no major combat being recorded specifically in the cemetery, several of the graves seem to clearly show evidence of fighting. But the larger reason for including it here is for who is buried here. Head to the southeast corner of the cemetery, and there you will find grave markers listing the names of an estimated 1,300 war victims. These mass graves mostly contain civilians and German soldiers who likely died in the immediate area surrounding the cemetery. This includes 19-year-old Tony Feller, who died just as the Soviets captured Berlin. And on closer examination, you will notice that many of the dead are listed as Unbekannte, or unidentified, 161 on this tablet marker alone. And of those identified, most are listed as having perished during the final days of the Battle of Berlin. And even more telling of the intensity of the fighting, many have simply the month of death listed, suggesting that this person's remains were collected days, if not weeks after they died. And in many cemeteries in Berlin, mass graves can be found with unidentified souls, or the dates of death corresponding to the Battle of Berlin, or even previous major bombing raids of the city. This section of the cemetery really reminds you of the most tragic era in German history. But I think it's a stop you need to make to both truly understand Berlin's scars of war and to pay respects to the victims of this terrible conflict.
So I hope you will join me for part 2, where I visit the Reichstag, Potsdamer Platz, and a bit beyond. It will pop up as soon as that video is published. And check out this video of the World War II flak tower at Humbeltheim. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and more importantly, share it with somebody that you think might also like it, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers!